Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Take Back My Brain. I am your host, Laurie Hammer, and today we are going to dive into some homeschooling. So, all of you know that I am a homeschooling mom and I've been doing this for a very long time. And so, today I have a really wonderful guest. She's a fellow homeschooling mom. Her name is Cheryl Daley. She actually has a podcast called Homeschool How-To Podcast. So, if you're thinking about homeschooling or you already homeschool, make sure you check out that podcast. And she's also written a book that's called Let's Talk Emergencies, and I'm sure she will share that book with us as well. But she actually left her government job of 16 years to start homeschooling her kiddos. And so I'm really excited for her to share her story with us because I know there's lots of listeners out there like, should I homeschool? Should I not homeschool? I've been homeschooling for 18 years, and people are like, how did you do it this whole time? I'm like, it's one of the easiest things I've ever done. Maybe not easy every single day, but I would say the one of the best decisions, if not the best decision, besides, marrying my husband and stuff that I have ever done. So, Cheryl, welcome to the podcast, and I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, you were this career woman in the government and, doing all sorts of, I'm sure amazing things as a woman. And then you decided to homeschool your kids. So I have to know why.
Yeah. So I think for a lot of people, COVID kind of was this like
Oh,
wake up call to, can we really trust the people that are,
right.
guiding us and leading us every single day? And for me, my son was 3 years old at the time, and I'm in the state of New York.
Oh,
So,
wow.
I didn't really like that they
Mhm.
started mandating masks on 3-year-olds. He was in daycare. My husband and I were like, no, this is just where we draw the line. He's
Yep.
3. You're not putting cloth over his face. You know, that's ridiculous. So, that we pulled him out of daycare, and I was
Okay.
working from home during COVID. So it was,
Sure.
the kind of balancing
It
act having
works
him
out.
here.
Yeah.
But I was so afraid he wasn't going to be socialized because we took him out of daycare. So I joined a couple homeschooling groups that met in our area, figuring these are the people that are home all day. Let's go,
Right.
meet some kids. So I would take a couple hours off this afternoon or that afternoon and bring them out. And I was kind of talking to these homeschooling parents, like, you really do this? Like you're not afraid he's gonna be weird? And what do you do all day? Are you whittling and sewing your clothes? Like what could
Right.
you possibly do at home to fill up a day? It was just such a foreign concept to me. And you know, I just started talking to more of these parents, and they seem to just have a different outlook on life. Like I
Mhm.
was living this life for 16 years where I'd go to work, sit in a cubicle, wait for 4 o'clock to happen, come home, you make the dinner, get everybody ready for bed. I'd probably have a few glasses of wine because I couldn't stand the idea of going back to that
Back
place
to
the next
work.
day.
Right. Yeah.
And then you get up and do it all again the next day.
Hmm.
So these parents were kind of like, and they're not all moms. That was the cool part. There were some dads that stayed home and the
Right.
mother worked. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would just ask them like, what do you do all day? Like, how did you come to that? How did you leave your job? And it was more of a way of life to them.
Mhm.
Well, we go on hikes and we have play dates and we read books and we do projects and we kind of just play games and it was like, wow. So you just like enjoy your whole day? That's so weird.
That is so weird, isn't it? You mean you like
It's
waking up every single day and hanging out with your family?
it's like if someone's not controlling where you are at every moment, how do you know what to do?
Right?
I started the podcast because I was on maternity leave with my
Okay.
daughter at that point, and I said, "Let's start a podcast." My husband was like, "Yeah, all right, good idea," and I was like, "Well, that's weird. He never says that." So I started it, and just interviewing homeschooling families, like what do you do all day? How do you manage? Did you leave a job? How did you actually cut ties and
Yeah.
sacrifice the money, the income? How do you make it work? So it's been 2 years now of just listening to these people that are living life.
Yeah.
And that's like really like what it boils down to. And I'm excited to have you on my podcast to hear your story because everybody has such a beautiful story about how they do it. And it's just so inspiring. And at first walking away from my government job where this pension, everybody tells
It's
you you're
such a
so
draw,
lucky
right? Yeah.
you're going to get that pension. And it's like, well, by the time I get the pension and I'm home, my kids will be old enough to leave.
Right.
So that's weird. I'm going to miss them. And I've like missed all this time where they were kind of,
Yeah.
off getting raised by the school system. So, yeah, I started out the podcast like, should I homeschool? And now, I mean, it took 2 years to really, I think, get a full understanding of like how our education system came about,
Right.
the true intention of that, really looking into the schools and funding and testing and why certain kids, just because they're the same age, they all have to learn the same thing.
Right.
Like, it doesn't make any sense. So really like gradually wrapping my head around everything. That's kind of like where I came from. And I did quit my job and I haven't missed it. So,
Right.
you
And you
make
guys are
stuff work.
surviving. You still have food to eat and, your house is
We,
warm.
we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even in New York. Yeah.
Even in New York. Yeah. So how did you get your husband on board with all of this?
I mean, he's never trusted the government, probably. He was he was like more the conservative one when we met, and I was the liberal, like,
Uh-huh.
I probably would have been burning my bras in the 60s, not realizing that they just want a bigger tax base. So,
Right.
that social justice warrior. It really took me kind of coming around. And I think COVID, he would send me things like for him, COVID was sort of laughable because he does commercial HVAC. So he's out
Oh.
and hospitals and jails and government buildings. And he would see the people that were like super high up mandating that all of the employees wear masks. He'd see them in the back room not wearing masks and talking to
Mm-hmm.
each other and
Mm-hmm.
this and that, so he's like, this is a joke. Like there,
Right.
um, so then he'd come home and kind of tell me about it. And he might send me a video on these doctors have, this, they're saying that this is curing COVID in their patients. And I would share it on social media and then get banned or
Oh
get
yeah.
like hate messages from people. And I'm like, I'm literally telling you a possibility to
Right.
like stay alive if you're worried about this. And they didn't want to hear it. So that kind of opened my eyes too. That pushback was like, what's
It
going
was really
on?
bizarre, wasn't it? It was such a bizarre pushback. I got
Yeah.
shut down on social media too. And I mean, I'm a nutritional therapist, right? So of course I'm going to tell you to take zinc and your vitamin D. And I wasn't even like bashing COVID at the time. I was just saying, hey, these are other options to boost your immune
Yes.
system, should you choose to, because my immune system cannot protect your immune system. It just doesn't work that way, right? So me getting a shot or me masking isn't going to really protect you from this virus. So you have to take care of yourself kind of stuff. And I got shut down.
Unreal.
Yeah, for like 8 months. So, anyway, and it was crazy. I mean, I live in Iowa, so we didn't have all the craziness like New York had for
Yeah.
sure. But I never wore a mask. I shouldn't say that. I wore a mask one time to take my mom to the doctor, but she had dementia and they wouldn't let her in the door. Like she didn't even know what she had on her face. She didn't
Mhm.
want it. She was, basically like a 3-year-old at that point in time. And it was just utterly ridiculous. So I wore a mask at that point in time just to get her into the doctor.
Yeah.
But other than that, never wore a mask here. It wasn't a big issue here, and people just weren't angry like they were in other places. But social media was a whole nother story. That's just
Yeah.
a whole nother world. Oh my goodness, Cheryl.
And it opened my eyes to, well, one, that there's censorship. I'm like,
Right?
I never realized that until you're censored, you
Mhm.
don't think it exists.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
yeah, and then so the masking kind of turned into, then the vaccine was a thing and everybody at work. I mean, at that point, I was going back into the office and, we just kind of found other things to do with our kids, like a grandparent's house or something.
Sure.
So they didn't have to be subject to that. But I would go in and I was hated by people at this point because of the stuff on social media. But it's so funny because the same people that were so scared of, that said, I'm killing them if I'm not wearing my mask, someone would bring in leftovers from a party at their house the night before and they'd all scavenge to it like like pigeons and
Right.
eating all this crap that was in someone's house.
Right.
Like you don't know what they had,
Right.
and that it's leftover. And then you're all going to put your hands on the same food. So it was at that point that I'm just like, I
It
don't even
doesn't
think I
make
can
any
work with
sense.
these idiots anymore.
Right. Yeah,
But
for
I was the
sure.
problem.
Right. So your paradigm really started to shift. So,
Yeah.
what have you learned in the last 2 years? I mean, that things were crazy during COVID, but what else have you learned that kind of solidified your guys's decision to homeschool? You were talking about the reason school was set up in the first place. I would
Yeah.
love for you to share that journey with the audience because I know there's other people wanting to homeschool or just starting and probably getting a lot of feedback, bashlack, all that kind of stuff from people.
Yeah. Well, and especially with you being in the nutritional space, I mean, my latest I guess realization is that most of the schools in our country now offer free breakfast and free lunch. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we can quote free because it's really paid for by us,
Us.
but
Yeah.
what they're serving is not nutritional at all.
No, not at all.
Full of chemicals, full of cancer causing ingredients. And I can, I work hard to make sure that what we give our kids, that we try to do organic, or if not organic, a local farm, you
Yep.
know, um, we know your farmers, that sort of
Yes.
thing, get
Yes.
the cow that was butchered at the local farm, chickens from the local, we switched to raw milk and raw yogurt, and it's illegal here, but, so we're like really trying to make sure our kids have nutritious foods. But if
Right.
they were in school, they could literally throw out everything I give them and eat the pancakes and the high fructose corn
Yeah. Yeah.
syrup and the, pizza for lunch with the glyphosate and all of the wheat and all of that. And I would know none the
And no, no,
wiser.
right. You have no idea.
Yes. So that has been my latest, like, wow, you really have no
Hmm.
control. The vaccine issue in New York. I mean, I never knew I had to look into that because you take your kid to a pediatrician and you're trusting someone who's trusting a
Right.
government entity.
Right.
So I just, they tell you what they did at that visit and they send you home with some pamphlets. But, obviously the COVID shot, a lot of people were against that. Did our research and decided this was not for us.
Hmm.
And then I got looking into the other vaccines and what are the ingredients and
Hmm.
what were the safety tests. So if in New York, if you don't want to get every single thing on the recommended CDC schedule, you can't even go to school. At that point, my son was going to be fine through fifth grade anyways. But for my daughter, that was going to be an issue, even going
Issue.
to
Yeah.
daycare. So we live close enough to Vermont, though. I could have made it work if that was the only obstacle. But
Hmm.
that was one obstacle now to my eyes were
Yep.
opening up to
Yep.
that. And then really getting into the history of education. So not putting the mask on my child, that to me felt like when they were saying your kid's 3 and he needs a mask in daycare, I felt like that was taking a parental right away from me, right?
Hmm.
I'm the mom. I'm saying I don't want cloth on his face and you're telling me he's got to have it anyway. So the school system, when you really start looking into that, it's interesting because, we think it's always been there. You don't know what you don't know
Right.
until you research it.
Hmm.
We feel like school's always been here and the homeschoolers are weird. People have been homeschooling for centuries and centuries and centuries. You
Centuries. Yes.
teach your kids what they need to know to survive and you
Hmm.
add in some extras if they enjoy doing something. So when you really look back at the history of the education system, it started from the Prussian model and it was brought over by Horace Mann and then, implemented more by John Dewey. And then the Rockefellers felt, hey, let's invest in this. We'll give you money if you put our people on the board and we'll
Hmm.
just kind of advise that what you're doing with our money is
Good.
appropriate.
Right.
Also, meaning we're going to write your textbooks and this is what you're going to start
Hmm.
teaching the kids. So, I hate like all these buzzwords like indoctrination, but that really is kind of what was happening. And then, so we went from like these one room schoolhouses that kids would just all the kids in the area would learn the basic reading, writing, math, and
Hmm.
about the Bible. And then it like we just went from 0 to 60, I feel like,
Right.
from
Yeah.
okay, well, now everybody's going to go to school. You're going to be separated by age. We're going to tell schools what they have to teach. We're going to start testing on it. And then, by the way, mom, you should go to work too,
Hmm.
for all the ladies burning the bras. And I know that's kind of like not, people have researched that wasn't actually what they were. There's more into that. But
There's more to,
um,
yeah, but
yeah, but what
the
we
point
typically
is,
think of, we
yeah.
want women's liberation, send
Hmm.
me to work. And it's
Hmm.
so silly.
Now we're like, I
Um,
just want to stay
but,
home.
but we doubled our tax base. So
Yeah.
now the
Yeah.
government's getting double the
Hmm.
money from us, and they needed something to do with our kids while mom and dad are both at work all day.
Right.
So then we open up into, here we are for 8 hours a day now, and starting earlier and earlier and earlier.
Right.
So it really like opened my eyes to, oh, so you didn't always have the education system. This is like in the last 120 years,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
such a small speck when you
Small
think of how
speck.
long humanity has
Yeah.
been here.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. So, and then just reading books like Free to Learn,
Hmm.
um, John Taylor Gatto's
Oh yeah, because
books.
he's from New York. I mean, his
Yes.
books are classic. So any of you listening, John Taylor Gatto, Gatto, his books are golden. So if you want to understand education as a whole and why the educational system, public education system does what it does, you really need to read his books for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, dumbing us down, and he has weapons of mass instruction. But he was a teacher. He won New York Teacher of the Year. And that
Yeah.
same year,
Yeah.
he stepped down and said, I'm done with this. And he started writing books and advocating for homeschooling,
Yeah.
talking about how school is just making these cookie cutter factory workers, basically making people who would be smart enough to do the job, but not smart enough to question it. And when you
Hmm.
look around at society, that's what I was in the cubicle,
Oh,
you know?
100%, right? I've been there, done that. Um, Yeah, it was a whole unlearning experience for me when we started homeschooling because he just started second grade. So we did kindergarten, first grade with him. And then I was pregnant with our daughter. And then we started homeschooling like right before I gave birth to her. So it was a crazy year. But all of a sudden I'm like, I didn't know this. They never taught, this wasn't in our textbook. Like, and then you look, your whole worldview changes. Your
Mm-hmm.
whole worldview changes when you start understanding history, like the real history. And then you go on this trail. And then so all these things I never thought I would homeschool because my parents' neighbors um, were homeschoolers. And all I heard was her yelling at her kids all day, right? And her kids were really, really weird. Really weird. I come home from college because they moved in after I
Oh,
moved away, but her kids were just a little odd, I thought. And I'm like, I am never homeschooling because that's what homeschooling looks like. But then I married my husband, and he has a cousin who homeschools 8 kids. And I'm like, watching them as they navigate everything. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. I think I can do that. And then, of course, this is our 18th year. So I don't know.
that's
It's
so
just
cool.
really fun. Yeah.
And you see the bond, like you said, you were home on maternity leave, and and then you had your second grader there. The bond that they're
Oh,
forming.
oh my
I mean,
goodness.
sure, it's hard because you have the second grader that wants your attention, and you have the baby, but if he were in school, he's
They
missing
wouldn't get
out.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're so close now. They're so close. Yeah.
It really is beautiful. And I look at that all the time when I see my kids playing, and they're boy and girl and 4 years apart, but they do play. Sure, they annoy each other too, but
They're supposed to. Yeah.
yeah, they're just forming these bonds that, like, as they grow older, like no one else is going to get those jokes.
Nope.
And that's another thing I've kind of discovered and talking to all these homeschooling families is when we have, public school or whatever, traditional school, I guess, if you went to private school, but they're forming these bonds in their classroom, like with
Hmm.
classmates and teachers.
Yeah.
And what home is kind of like the odd place where we're all coming to rush and get dinner on the table and rush to get
Right.
homework done and maybe use a screen and get ready for bed and then get up and do it all the next day. And, we have sports and
Hmm.
all that stuff that just busying us, that we're not like just being. It's
Yeah.
not typical for families to just be anymore, play a board game
Oh,
together.
yeah.
even like we're watching Little House on the Prairie. So like I'm like
Sure.
halfway on my way to like being the traditional
The
homeschooler,
tradition.
but like we're
Every homeschooler has to watch Little House on the Prairie. You
yeah,
just do.
we're watching. We could all sit around and read it together, but listen,
Right. That's okay. That's all right.
we're yeah,
You'll
but
get to the books later.
it's our little tradition now. Like the kids are always like, "Mom, are we gonna do ice cream in Little House on the Prairie?" And I'm like, "Well, we can't have the regular ice cream that we used to have because mommy started reading labels, but I'll let you have this."
Right.
I'm not making it from home, like from scratch, but I found a little bit better kind. So yeah, we'll eat ice cream and watch Little House on the
I love
Prairie
it.
most nights. And it's something will come up in the day and he'll be like, Mom, that's what Laura did. And
Yep.
it's like, yeah, that's like a little inside joke in the family.
Hmm.
That I feel like we miss it a lot when we're part of that mainstream life that I used to
Hmm.
be. It
Yeah.
was yeah.
Don't you look back now? You're like, what lifetime ago was that?
I can't imagine being back in an office with those people.
I
I mean,
know.
I was kind of a jerk about it too because I would write all the harms of masking and plaster my cubicle. I was the end cubicle, so I was against the wall. The whole wall was covered in the dangers of masking.
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, so I was kind of loud about it. They didn't like me. So no, I can't imagine being back there. I lost a lot of friends because there are the people who just look at it
Right.
as like, "Oh, now you must be racist," or like,
Right.
and it's
Right.
like, guys, come on.
Right. Right. We're just talking about common sense here.
Yes, we're talking about a
In
mask, we're talking about vaccines, like it, but you have to just kind of do what's best for you and your family. You get to a point in your life where you're like, I just don't care what other people think. We're gonna do
yeah.
what's good for us.
Yeah.
And you make
Exactly.
friends that align with, especially in the homeschooling community.
Yeah. Oh, 100%, 100%. And it's a beautiful community. It's a really beautiful community. And I've been in it long enough to see lots of different phases of it and
Mm.
different reasons for homeschooling, and all those kind of things. So the face of homeschooling has definitely changed, especially since, the whole lockdown thing that
Yes.
ravaged the country. So
Yeah.
I want to hear about your book. So it looks like an adorable book. Let's talk emergencies, right?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a paranoid person
Uh-huh.
anyway. And
Yep.
as we had friends over last night, they have 5 boys. And every time I'd hear like a loud thud, I would just immediately think my 2-year-old was falling down the basement stairs. So I'd run over to the door and they're
Oh,
like,
Cheryl.
you really like, I'm like, well, I did write a book. I'm like, 80 ways your kids could die, but no, it's really not like that. It's how to prepare our children for how to handle an emergency situation. And I got talking to, well, I was doing like little curriculums with my son before I was kind of like, oh, maybe we don't even really need to do curriculum. But, last year in kindergarten year, I was trying to replicate school as most
Right?
homeschoolers usually do their first
And then
year.
we find out it doesn't really work, and then we move on. So,
Yes.
yes.
But it had in it what's mom's phone number. And I was like, that's the best information in this whole book. What is my
Hmm.
phone number? So we got teaching him my phone number and but it only asked it a couple times. And I was like, well, we really need to like go over this often. And then I got talking to my brother-in-law. He was a retired officer. And I said, what information do you think kids need to know that you've seen that they just don't know? And he goes, they never know their parents' first and last names ever. Like if there's a lost kid, they never
Interesting.
know their parents' names. And especially like a lot of times mom and dad don't have the same last name.
Sure.
They don't have the mom doesn't have the same last name as the child. So he goes, they never know their parents' names. And then I got into, we don't have landlines anymore. We don't really have like payphones
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
So how does a kid call 911? My daughter right now is with my in-laws. If God forbid one had a stroke and they only had a cell phone there, does my daughter know how to call 911 from that cell phone? Because it is possible to call
Right.
911 from a locked cell phone.
Right.
So then it was kind of like, all right, well, let's start like making a list of everything I should teach my kids without paranoing, like have complete paranoia or scaring them to
Right.
death. So I just kind of started a book on, this little family where the parents are trying to teach their son things that he would need to know to keep himself safe in an emergency situation. And, the illustration, actually, my illustrator was a retired New York State trooper. No,
Oh,
NYPD. No,
nice.
NYPD. Yeah, New York Police Department. Yes, she was retired NYPD. So that was really cute.
Yeah.
And so the little daughter, the sister in the background is getting into trouble in every scene. So that was kind of fun. And it's mom and dad teaching the little boy what he has to do. And, we just live in a different world today than when I grew up, you grew
Yep.
up. It gets into the internet safety, what
Sure.
is appropriate, what isn't, because that's really a scary thing. And I got talking to teachers, about what they teach in school. Like,
Hmm.
I think parents think we send them there all day long. You must be teaching everything, right? And teachers are like, I have 30 kids. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have time to teach your kid what your name is, your last name, your address,
Right.
your phone number. So, yes, it's all in rhyme and it's just a fun way for the kids to
Right.
recite their address, their mom's phone number, their dad's phone number, mom and dad's first and last name, and, different situations, how some water's deeper than it might look. We want to stay away from pool covers
Oh,
because,
wow. Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I know, like I said, I'm trying not to like scare people too much, but it is in
But I mean,
rhyme.
it's a
It's in
legitimate
rhyme.
thing. Yeah. It's in rhyme. It's fine. It's fine. Mary had a little
Everything
more.
seems less abrasive when it's in rhyme.
That is true. Hmm. This is great, Cheryl. Awesome. So where do they find your book?
It's right on Amazon. Yeah. It's called Let's Talk
Okay.
Emergencies. Yeah. And there's a little
Awesome.
activity book you can get to go along with it
Oh,
just to kind of
cute. Cute.
reinforce the concepts. Yeah. It was just my paranoia.
Yeah.
Felt better
Awesome.
having it written down.
There you go. That's fine. That's fine. Well, I'll definitely put the link to that down in the show notes. So anybody listening, you're
Awesome.
like, hey, where do I find that? It'll be in the show notes for sure. Um, what do you want to tell parents who are thinking about homeschooling?
You know, we just have this idea in our head that it looks like everybody's up at the crack of dawn and we're all sitting around the table and we're all reading a book together and baking muffins and like that's perfectly wonderful, right? If that's what you want to do and if that's what your kids
Hmm.
enjoy doing. But it doesn't have to look like that. I think the biggest realization for me was that there's nothing your kid needs to know by any certain age. Like they're not getting taken from CPS, by CPS because you didn't teach them to multiply by 12.
Right.
I tried to push the reading when my son was 5. It was just leading to tears on both ends. And, when you really start to talk to people, I've talked to over 100 homeschooling families by now, like the less you push it and just let them come to it when they're cognitively ready, they're going
Hmm.
to get it in a fraction of the time. So what
100%.
would take a 5-year-old an entire year to learn, your kid maybe at 8 would learn it in a week or two or a month.
Right.
It
Yeah.
doesn't mean don't read to your kid. You always have to read to your kid, but those should be enjoyable moments that you're
Right. Yeah.
find a good book, find a book that they love, or maybe you both pick books so that you're getting a little bit of, what you want to teach them and what they want to be involved in. But as long as they're hearing story, like that's the most important part.
Right.
The things like math and all that stuff, it seems overwhelming to parents that are like, well, I didn't do good in math, so therefore I can't teach math. There are so many like outsourcing ways
Hmm.
to teach
Yeah.
everything that you can still be a homeschooler and have your kid take an online course or hire a tutor. There's just so many different ways. And I think that one of the biggest things is people think I can't homeschool because I work. And I've talked to a lot of homeschoolers where, yeah, both mom and dad do work, but they still find a way to make homeschooling work. You just have
Yep.
to think out of the box because
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be done during 9 and 3, Monday
Nope.
through Friday. You can do it in the evenings or on the weekends. It doesn't have to take 6 hours. It might take 30 minutes when they're
Hmm.
young, and maybe an hour or two when they're older. But by that time, they're reading on their own. So
Right.
they can do more independent work. When you think of things like, can grandma and grandpa watch them while I'm at work and we do their schoolwork in the evenings or on the weekends? Or is there another homeschooling family in our area that I can send my kids there and either pay them or swap? I take their kids on the
Hmm.
weekends. Um, or is there a homeschooling family with older homeschoolers that are maybe looking to gain experience or make some cash and they come and watch your
Right.
kid while you work from home or while you go off to work, so there's
Yep.
just so many. And then there are schools that are these pop-up schools that are starting, whether
Hmm.
it's a farm school or nature school,
Yep.
all over the place where they aren't attached to the government at all. But maybe it's a drop-off program, or maybe mom or dad can work in the lobby while their
Yeah.
kid attends. They're all over. So I just really would urge parents that if you have any desire at all to homeschool, to just look into it. Don't be scared away by the fact that you think it has to look a certain way. It doesn't have to look like Little House on the Prairie, because actually she sent her kids to school. But
She did. The one room schoolhouse, yes. And her daughter Laura was teaching school by what, 15?
oh my goodness,
Yeah,
I'm not there yet in the episodes.
I know, right? So sorry, spoiler alert.
oh man.
Oh, sorry. Oh, this is great, Cheryl. I love the fact that you went on this adventure and that, that you are encouraging other homeschooling families along the way. So it is not as scary as you think it might be. Um, and it definitely does not have to look a particular way. So it took us a couple of years to figure that out in our homeschool journey as well. But here we are 18 years later, and I never regret any of it. Never regret any of it. It's been
I'm
such a blast.
excited to hear your journey when I
Yeah,
interview you, because I it's,
it'll
it's
be
it's so
really
cool to
fun.
hear the end result too, sort of
Yes.
the how did they turn out? What are they doing? And from the people I've talked to that are at sort of the end of their homeschooling journey, their kids just seem so like well-rounded and passionate about things and
Yeah.
love learning. Like I
That's
think
the
that's
thing. Yeah, that's the thing.
yeah,
You were talking about not every kid has to learn to read by age 5. I've heard people say, well, if your kid doesn't know how to do XYZ by third grade, they're going to fail for life. That is a bunch of BS. Bunch of BS for sure. Because they have to love to learn. So our goal was always to facilitate a love for learning. Do you love what you're doing? Do we always succeed in that? Are there things that my kids hate doing? Of course. I mean, that's just human nature.
yeah,
But both of them love to learn new things. Whatever they're passionate about, they're going to dive into it and they're going to learn about it. And they don't have to learn all this other garbage that, serves them no purpose because, you know, if you're going to train horses, you don't need to know organic chemistry. You don't need to take
right.
a physics class. So you can learn physics by learning how your horse moves. I mean, you don't have to learn it through a textbook. There's so many ways to learn that don't involve some government written textbook. And it's just so much more fun. I mean, God created us to have fun in this life, to have joy, and we steal it by sending our kids to school and then they don't want to learn
Yes.
anymore. And then, there's all these mental blocks for the rest of their life. So
Yes.
I've had to unlearn my own mental blocks.
It's true. Yes. And
Yeah.
I think everybody starts out replicating school because that's all that we know. I mean,
Right. Right.
it'd be like asking you to bake a cake, different. Like I would just go to the grocery store in aisle 4 and get Betty Crockers. But I didn't grow up knowing that you can put flour
Really? Really? You
and
can do that? It doesn't come in a box?
what do you mean? So
Yeah.
it's just exploring. You're learning yourself. So it's
Oh my gosh.
allowing time
So
for
much fun.
you to learn. And yeah, I think just hearing that, like everything they need to know to be successful in life, they can learn in their high school years. And it's just really like preserving that childhood. You
Yeah.
only get one, and
Yeah.
letting play be the most important thing.
Yeah.
We So many kids don't get that.
I fully, fully agree with you. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I appreciate you so much sharing your journey with everyone in the audience. And thank you all for listening. And I will see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.